Welcome, everyone. We're looking forward to today's webinar. I'm going to get us launched here. All right. Well, while we wait for confirmation that he's here, I'm just going to let everyone know that you are here because you signed up for the Pulse MiLEAP Business Leader webinar series. And today's session, Why Childcare is a Workforce Strategy, should really help you understand the context for childcare and why it matters to us from an economic and workforce perspective. And we've got some incredible speakers on the docket for you that are going to share their expertise, their knowledge, their insight, all towards helping you understand what role you can play in making a difference. A few housekeeping items. If you'd like to, please introduce yourself in the chat with your name, your organization, and location so that we can capture that. We are recording this session so that it's available to all those who registered and for you to go back and review if you want to. You will also be receiving the recording with the resources following the webinar. There is a Q&A feature to submit questions through the session, and we encourage participation through chat, polls, and discussions. We also know that closed captions are available through your own Zoom, and you can set that up if it's needed. Oh, thank you very much, Kelly, for letting us know that. So you know who you're going to be hearing from today. I'm Kathy Szenda Wilson, co-executive director of Pulse. You will hear from me intermittently. I am joined today as our co-sponsor in today's webinar by Aaron Merchant with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation, Brittany Birkin from the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta, Jaron Kalina, who's a senior manager with Business Leaders United, Cynthia Britton from MiLEAP, and Leslie Poucher from the CalSEX Early Learning Center. And so we are going to get ourselves started here by getting into what is Pulse. For those of you who may not know who we are, Pulse is part of the W.E. Upjohn Institute, and we are a co-led effort that's dedicated to transforming the early childhood landscape. We want to make sure that every family, every child has the things they need to thrive. So we use all the tools at our disposal to do that. We try and bridge the gap between research and practice. And that we want to not just make sure that's the case in Michigan, but we want to make sure that it's happening all over the place where we can have an impact. So we do partner with others. We know that this is not solo work. It is work that has to be done collaboratively. And we do our best to create relationships with folks like those who are on this call so that we can make sure that we're making the biggest difference possible and not just creating programs, but changing the systems that impact families' lives. And so we use a systems change lens that allows us to really kind of get at the root causes of the challenges that we're going to face. So you may hear throughout this presentation the different ways that we are presenting what those root causes are and the challenges that communities face so that they can understand what role they can play. I'm going to turn it over to Aaron, who's going to give us some context around what are we seeing around this issue in the country? What work has the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation done around this? And I can tell you it's a lot. And I'm grateful that Pulse has been able to partner with them in a lot of the work that they've done around the country. So Aaron, take it away.
Hey, thanks so much, Kathy. Thrilled to be here. And I'll start right off the bat with the next slide. Just so I'm not looking at my own face, and then we'll do one more. That's just the title slide. It's not a big deal. Yeah, so right. So here on this a little bit dramatic graphic, we'll pause for a moment to talk about the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation and our work in the childcare space. So it was 10 years ago-ish that the Chamber Foundation released a report called Workforce of Today, Workforce of Tomorrow. It was the first time that the Chamber Foundation had sort of publicly drawn a connection between how the strength of a childcare workforce impacts the rest of the U.S. workforce. I'm told at the time the Chamber Foundation anticipated that they thought that they would have to kind of go from town to town presenting this report, explaining it to people. But instead, the reaction that they got was, oh my God, finally, like we have been trying to crack this nut, like we've been trying to figure this out. So glad that you're shining light on this. after the Workforce of Today, Workforce of Tomorrow report, which, as the name implies, just outlines that childcare is essential for parents and caregivers to enter the workforce now, and not just enter it, but stay and thrive and grow in the workforce, and critical to build the workforce of tomorrow. The brain science is pretty obvious about the first 5 years of a child's life. Um, what we have found at the Chamber Foundation is that it's a national issue, often solved by local solutions. And we have, and we'll talk about Michigan's in a moment, but we have, I think, 16 reports that we call untapped potential reports. We put them out every few years for the last 6 or 7 years. And what the Chamber Foundation set out to do was quantify the economic, well, if you want to be glass half empty, quantify the economic losses due to, but if you want to go glass half full, quantify the economic possibilities of investing in childcare. And so we find that states often have anywhere from hundreds of millions to several $billions in economic losses due to breakdowns in childcare. Uh, and so that's what brings me again to this slightly dramatic, but nonetheless compelling graphic here, where we look at childcare is workforce infrastructure. And what we mean by that is that a lack of affordable, accessible, quality childcare creates a whole ripple effect that drags down entire economies. And so if there's no childcare, then parents are going to have to miss work. Parents miss work and reduce hours. They may ultimately leave their job either because of the costs of care or because they're let go for not being able to meet the requirements of that job. The longer parents are out of the workforce, the less likely they are to re-enter it. And just to be completely candid, usually when we say parents, we mean women. And then for employers, this may creates turnover challenges, creates recruitment challenges. That could be for an established business. It could be for a business that's trying to open a new site or an HQ2 or a new manufacturing plant. It's tough to find the workforce that you need to be competitive in your sector if a big chunk of your workers either don't have access to childcare or don't have access to quality childcare. And a quick personal aside, about 4 years ago, my wife and I moved from DC to another state because we were anticipating adding to our family. And at one point, we had our oldest son in a childcare center that was just not an ideal situation. And because of that, we kept our younger son home. And I can tell you, Kathy, that were I not the childcare policy guy at my at the Chamber Foundation, it's 50-50 in terms of my productivity if I would still have this job. You can't really fire the childcare guy because he can't find childcare. So really lucked out on that one. But and so when we talk about how childcare impacts business competitiveness, business productivity, this is what we mean, where it may seem like, a personal issue, like, oh, like you got two kids, you better figure that out. But when it is society wide, when it is people at all income levels, when it is people in all states saying they cannot find and or afford childcare, that's when it becomes an issue for all of us. And when I say becomes, I mean that's why right now it's an issue for all of us. And it's not just childcare folks and people with childcare in their title who are tracking this. And on the next slide, we'll see that the Federal Reserve Bank interviewed employers from some of Michigan's neighbors. They talked to businesses in Wisconsin and Iowa. And what the Federal Reserve Bank found based on these interviews, so Chamber Foundation had some quantitative data, now we're talking about qualitative data based on interviews, but they found that there is a direct correlation. I know this might sound obvious, but always helpful to have like some real numbers and some real case studies to this, but that in the areas where there was a supply side squeeze for childcare, where there were fewer childcare providers, and the reasons there are fewer childcare providers are myriad. It's the pay is not very high. Oftentimes, it does not come with benefits. I just have two kids, and I get tuckered out by the end of a weekend. We're talking a classroom full of 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5-year-olds. So the more the number of providers shrink, there's a direct correlation between that and the number of workers that other sectors have access to. So you've got fewer childcare providers, you've got fewer workers overall to fill out the rest of the jobs in the workforce. And again, this was the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago. We've seen similar findings from Fed Reserve banks across the country in the different regions. So better might not be the word. It's in some regions of the country, it's not quite as intense, but it is an issue across the board.
Oh, okay. Aaron seems to be frozen, so we're gonna take a look at this, the labor supply sitting on the sidelines. Aaron, if you can hear us, you're frozen. So I'm wondering, there you go. He's gonna probably hop back in. He has a couple surveys here. While we're waiting for him to come back in, I'm going to take this time to go over to what we see in Michigan right now. And I just want to start by setting some parameters around what we see as the supply need and the demand need here. And in the US, we have over 15 million children potentially needing care, with just under 11 million slots available, which means that we've got a 28.2% childcare gap of potential need. And in Michigan, that translates to we've got about 430,514 children potentially needing care, with a supply of slots numbering 311,240, which means we have a 28% childcare gap. Now, that is slightly lower than the national need, but it's still, for every one of those families, is a really significant issue that they have to bear the challenges of, as Aaron's shared earlier. He had a flexible job to manage that. Many people don't have that privilege or that honor, so it's a real challenge for them. Welcome back, Aaron. I was just hopping along to some supply stuff here, so I'm going to go back to your slides and let you finish off where you were. Hang on
I'm
one
so sorry,
second.
Kathy. I have no idea what happened.
That's okay. You know what? This is the beauty of us having Zoom and all of us knowing that we have those challenges every once in a while. I'm gonna have you pick back up here.
Perfect. And I think we're on just the next slide. What I was about to say, I'm not sure the degree to which you heard me. You might be thinking labor supply is a weird way to describe parents. But the sort of running joke that my team and I have is that how creative can we be in getting people who don't know that they care about childcare yet to care about it? And sometimes it's putting it sort of the coldest MBA type terms. Um, and so folks are not joining the workforce specifically because they don't have childcare. Now, this 45%, there's a little star down there. There was a study done of families who were eligible for childcare subsidies in Virginia. And then there's a big subset of those families who are even on the wait list, like they qualify, but there's not enough to go around. They're on the wait list. Of those folks on the wait list, almost half said that they had an adult in their household that left a job altogether due to childcare constraints. And so these are the folks with the least amount of financial flexibility. They're also oftentimes the folks that have jobs that are, as we saw during the pandemic, the essential, I put quotes just because it's not really a term we use anymore, but the essential workers
Right.
that sort of keep the whole machine going. And so these are the folks that are most in need of some support to access quality childcare, and the quickest to lose it. In Ohio, and I know there's like a rivalry between Michigan and Ohio, so hopefully this is an okay statistic to use. I don't know how deep that runs, but Policy Matters Ohio surveyed parents, and they found that almost 2/3 of parents who identified as not working full time would be working full time if affordable childcare was available. And so it's not an issue of, thanks, Lisa. It's not an issue of folks not wanting to work, of folks having objections to working. It's that they actually can't. And we oftentimes hear from some constituencies, they're like, oh, so is the chamber's goal that we have 100% workforce participation, that every single person is at the workforce? And the answer is no, actually. We want people to have options, and we want people to have flexibility. If people would like to stay home, we want that to be an option for them. But we also don't want someone who needs or wants to be in the workforce to be prevented from doing so because of childcare. So on the next slide, we get a little bit deeper into the numbers about Michigan specifically. So I mentioned those untapped potential reports. This one came out in 2023, almost $3 billion annually. And that is what we feel is a conservative number, in that it's just based on the cost to the employer due to turnover, absences, missed work, et cetera. And then taxes that are not being collected when that amount of workforce participation is lost. 1 in 2 parents surveyed needed to make significant adjustments to their work or training due to childcare issues. And 14% in the 6 months previous to August 2023 reported leaving a job due to childcare issues. And so that speaks to a broader base than just the folks in that lower income quartile. And we're also seeing that the pressure around finding childcare has reached the point. I oftentimes use the example of Huntsville, Alabama, which is the Rocket City. They have the Rocket Science Center there, and so these are folks. They have the highest number of PhDs per capita in the country. They have folks that come from all over the world. They're literal rocket scientists, and they can't find childcare. And it's not because they can't afford it. It's just because you could tell your employees that I will pay for your childcare 100% every month. But if there are no spots, if there are no providers to provide that care, then it's a voucher for $0, even though the worth would be probably over $1,000 a month if that were the offer. And then we'll head to the next slide, Kathy.
Yeah, just real quick, Aaron.
Yeah,
I think this
absolutely.
reminds me of a story that I heard that was about a scientist, just to make sure that this isn't just about people being able to pay their bills, right? There was a scientist who was quoted saying that had she not had access to quality, affordable childcare at the time in her career when she was having children, she would have not discovered this particular cure for a cancer. Like
Wow.
these are people being sidelined for really important jobs as well, right? So this is something for us to keep in mind, that these are folks that want to be at work, that want to contribute to the greater good, whatever it is they're doing, and not to minimize people who are just having jobs because they have to pay the bills. That's obviously what we want also,
Yes.
but there is a bigger context here that we have to always keep in mind as well. Thanks.
No, absolutely. And it's a lot of times we'll hear, well, oh, it's a squeeze for 2 or 3 years, or we figured it out, etc. With the cost of living going up, the cost of childcare going up correspondingly. Um, Another quick anecdote is that I have a friend who lives in Buffalo, New York. Her neighbor is an orthopedic surgeon, and one of their um, priorities as a family was to have a big. They both came from big families. They wanted to have a lot of kids, so they had, I think, 5 kids. And at one point, 3 of them were like below the age of 5, and so they had a talk, and the wife and the family just opted to stay home because it got to the point that they work crazy hours, so it's non-traditional hours for childcare. You got 3 kids in childcare, and then during the summer, 5 kids that they didn't know where to go, and so um, we have one slide that talks about the essential workers, the lower income brackets, and how hard it is to find childcare. But then also you've got a family. It kind of seems like they have all the resources in the world, and yet the math just doesn't add up, and then the schedules and timing just doesn't add up. Um, so what does this mean for employers? So we've talked about the problem a lot. Let's talk about some solutions. Let's not put the problem on a pedestal here. Um, there were 2 different surveys, one in 2024, one in 2025, that went out. They were conducted by companies that are national providers of childcare. And so uh, Care.com did a survey of employers, and they found that above 80% of employers surveyed said that childcare benefits positively impacted talent recruitment, retention, and productivity. A year later, KinderCare did a similar survey, same thing. And so we are seeing between 80 and 90% of employers being surveyed year over year. Now, you might be wondering, are some of the same employers surveyed? I don't have that data. But we do have 2 companies here where their whole business is childcare. And so they're asking their employers, have you found this investment to be worth it? And again, above 80% in both surveys said yes. Um, and then First 5 Years Fund did a survey in 2023, and over half of employers said they were prioritizing childcare benefits to recruit and retain staff. We have heard some reports that some companies have started to kind of scale back those benefits. And why I mean, perhaps I'm biased, but why I think that's a bad idea will be found on the next slide. So even if you're thinking, well, KinderCare and Care.com, of course, they think that's a good idea to have childcare benefits. What's in it for them? Well, Harvard also did some research on this, and there were two. I mean, there's several data points here, but there were 2 big things that came out of that Harvard study. One, 80% of workers, so 80% of employees, acknowledged caregiving responsibilities that affected their productivity. But when they asked the employers of those employees, how much do you think childcare or caregiving responsibility impacts your employees' productivity? About 1 in 4 said, I think it probably does. So there's a disconnect there between the employees and the employers. However, in that same Harvard study, of the employers who did provide childcare benefits. 50% of those businesses saw less absenteeism. Um, on average, the employers saw 72% return on investment. And then there was a Moms First Boston Consulting Group study that found that 86% of employees were more likely to remain with their employer because of that childcare benefit. In that same study by BCG and Moms First, they found that, and Kathy, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think it was um, if these companies retained 1% of the workers that they would have lost because of childcare complaints, that it makes up for the cost of the benefit.
Yes.
And so there is a real stake in employers getting involved in this. And so on our last slide here, I want to talk about one, just kind of a summary, but two, mention that employers come in all different shapes and sizes. And I think that that is something the Chamber Foundation really focuses on as we do this work, is making sure that we are not just promoting childcare solutions that work for like a multinational conglomerate or for an HQ. But I will say that a quick summary is that the cost of inaction exceeds the cost of investment. Whether it's Harvard, Care.com, the Boston Consulting Group, the ROI is huge when you invest in childcare supports for your employees. This is not a silver bullet, but one important piece of legislation that came, or one important component of a giant piece of legislation that came out last year is in HR 1, aka the One Big Beautiful Bill. There was an update to the tax code. We call it 45F because it's shorter, but it's the Employer Provided Child Care Tax Credit. Up until 2025, businesses could get $150,000 in a tax credit up to 25% of their costs. If any of you have looked into how much it costs to invest in childcare benefits, it is much more than $150,000. So uptake of the credit was low because it's a drop in the bucket if you're like building a childcare center. But also, most businesses, the majority of businesses, can't build a childcare center on their own. And so in the One Big Beautiful Bill, they moved that amount from $150,000 to $500,000. That's for all businesses. For small businesses, up to $600,000, and it allows small businesses to pool funds and receive proportional credit under the new 45F. And so if there are questions about that, I can talk about it more now, but I'll also be sending Kathy what we call the game plan. The game plan. We almost called it the blueprint. But we're like, well, the blueprint has a certain sense of finality to it. So we called it the game plan. And it walks you through the nitty gritty of the new 45F and provides some examples for ways that businesses of all sizes can leverage that.
And Aaron, and webinar 3 is going to focus on 45F as well. So we'll have some other experts
fantastic.
on
Yeah, so
webinar 3. So we'll get a lot deeper. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Kathy.
No, that's validation that we were in the right direction when we set up this series. So thank you very much. Yeah, so thank you, Aaron. I think that just a little more about how Aaron and I got connected. During the pandemic, Pulse was really trying to engage employers around this issue of supporting their employees to address their childcare challenges. And so we did, a lit review. What's already out there that exists that we could use for our employers to benefit from? And we found an employer roadmap that the U.S. Chamber Foundation had created. And I got on the phone and called Aaron and I said, this is a beautiful piece of work and we'd love to customize it for Michigan. Do we have your permission to do that? And so the Pulse roadmap that you will find on the pulseroadmap.org website is built off of that. It has had several iterations since then because we keep learning, right? There's more things that are coming available. So continue to look at that resource as something that stays as fresh as we can keep it. We want to make sure that our employers in Michigan who are leaning into this and understand the need for it have the tools at their disposal to take action. And so that is the goal even of this webinar, is to really help us provide you with the information you need to make the best decisions possible, but also with the tools you'll need to actually implement. So there's, the element of just having to decide that this is something you need to tackle. And then there's, how do I do it, right? And so our additional webinars will also be focused on that so that you can walk away with some things. I'm going to provide a little more context around Michigan. I've already shared this child care gap report with folks to let you know that we have that, reinforcing what Aaron said about $3 billion is being left on the table when we're not addressing this, right? And so we want to make sure, and that was 3 years ago, right? Things have done nothing but go up. So we want to make sure that folks who don't think that this is their issue really understand that it's for all of us to solve. This isn't one sector issue to solve. When we all contribute what we can, where we can, that's when we're going to make a difference. And so there's a way for us to help you contextualize what some of that supply side challenge is. I want people who are not as familiar with the childcare world to understand that if you leave with no other taglines today, families can't afford to pay. The cost of care is great. We've already addressed that. Aaron really shared some of that as well. But teachers can't afford to stay. He mentioned that, this is a low wage sector because it's been under resourced for so long. So there is a real challenge for us to understand that when this business model that is running on very, very thin margins struggles to keep staff, just like many of our other employers do, that impacts the number of children that can be served, which impacts the supply, which impacts people who are trying to get to work but can't find the slots, and it impacts the wait lists that we hear about. So this is a visual that we created to help our legislators understand that. It is available on the pulseroadmap.org as well. Please feel free to use it in any way that you can. For people who really struggle to understand. Remember when we first started engaging our employers, they were like, I don't understand. I pay so much in childcare. How can they not be making so much money? And this is a way for them to understand the business model itself across the bottom here, that 83% of all the revenue coming in on average to most childcare centers is going to staff. And that's paying them almost poverty wages. So this is a challenging conundrum for us to be able to work on both sides of this. How do we work on the demand? How do we support employers to be part of the equation? And then how are we helping to build a workforce so that we've got the people to care for our children and to help their brains build, because we want a stronger next generation as well, right? So the bottom line is that businesses cannot hire workers if childcare programs can't hire teachers. And so these two things are so interconnected. We're not suggesting that employers have to play a role in all of that, but they play a role. And each of us, if we do our part, can actually make sure that when early childhood works, we all work, because that is the goal here. Not that every person, to Aaron's point, has a job, but every person who wants a job can get one, and that childcare isn't one of those barriers. And so to help us understand that a little bit more, I'm going to introduce Brittany Birkin, who is with the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta, who's done a lot of research on this and is going to help us understand it from their perspective. Brittany.
Thank you so much, Kathy. It's such a pleasure to be with you all this afternoon. I appreciate the opportunity. Next slide. So I am, as Kathy said, with the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta, and thought that I would start by sharing a little bit about why the Fed is interested in the issue of childcare, and then share some research that colleagues have done, that I have done, on various aspects of childcare. So the first issue, if you're wondering, why is the Federal Reserve Bank or the Federal Reserve System interested in the issue of childcare? It's in support of our goal of maximum employment for a strong economy. So researchers and community development experts across the federal system study childcare to better understand what are the implications on labor force participation for working families that have young children, and what are the challenges employers might have related to recruitment and retention for working families. Next slide. So childcare is a really complicated issue, and it's a part of the economic infrastructure, but there are nuances related to cost, availability, and other supply and demand factors that can be challenging for thinking about access and affordability issues. So understanding these complexities can help provide insights on what are the needs, what are the gaps, and importantly, what are the opportunities to better support the talent needs of employers and the economic mobility of working families for a stronger economy. Next slide. So as I mentioned, thought I would share some of the research from across the Federal Reserve System. So the first data point actually is analysis that the St. Louis Fed did in creating childcare fact sheets. I'll share an example of Michigan's a little bit later in my comments, but they documented that in 2024, nearly 1 in 5 prime age adults in the US had a young child. That's about 24.5 million people. So when we think about the portion of the labor force, it is not insignificant. And the Chicago Fed, which Michigan is in the footprint of the Chicago Fed district, did analysis to better understand the impact of childcare on parents' work and identified that a substantial number of parents are childcare affected. And we know this can lead to reduced productivity and economic output. And it really underscores the importance of both accessibility and affordability, as has been mentioned, in the ability for parents to maintain their employment and be able to contribute to the economy. Next slide. So taking a little bit of a closer look at some of the analysis, you can see here, this is the share of parents citing childcare problems as the main reason for not seeking work. The blue bars are pre-pandemic, red, peak pandemic, green, post-pandemic. And you can see that across the board, this challenge is becoming more acute post-pandemic. So this is an issue that has not dissipated after the pandemic, but is actually, there's an uptick and an increase. And if you look particularly for mothers, prime age working mothers with children under the age of 5. Next slide. This trend also holds true for the share of part-time working parents that have cited that childcare is the main reason they're not working full-time. So this is complementary to some of the information that Kathy and Aaron were talking about. And you can see that, again, for prime age working mothers with children under 5, more than 30% have signaled that childcare is the reason they're not able to work full-time and be a full-time part of the labor force. Next slide. So this is the part of the childcare state fact sheets. If you're interested, all of my slides have the direct links to these resources, but that helps document that, childcare is important for families' ability to work. So 20% of adults in Michigan have young children. That's about 733,000 people. And for single parents, which is 29% of Michigan mothers with young children, 18% of Michigan fathers, single parents, it would be essential for them to work. So one of the things, next slide, yes, that I wanted to share with you all is recent analysis that we completed at the Atlanta Fed. I worked with colleagues, and while this analysis is specific to Florida and Georgia, I think it has a lot of implications for other states and a lot of relevancy to this conversation. So Florida and Georgia have some of the fastest growing counties and metro areas. Understandably, adequate labor supply is going to be really important to support that growth. And the question and the wondering is, could high childcare costs have the potential to be an impediment to labor supply? And if so, what is the implication on that for high demand occupations that are really important for community development and business objectives? So in essence, the conversation for a number of years now has been childcare is unaffordable. And my interest was in digging in to say, what does that look like specifically? What does it mean? Is it unaffordable, and unaffordable to whom and where? Next slide. So here's the basic setup for this analysis. It was done in 6 counties in Florida and Georgia total, 4 in Florida, 2 in Georgia. And there are 12 occupations that we used for the analysis that are foundational and essential. And then we did some focus groups and added in, based on listening and learning, other occupations. Very intentionally, these are not just low wage occupations. So to the former comments of childcare access and affordability can be challenged for others. That was part of our question. So these are not just low income occupations that we used. And because families do not just come in one household type, we wanted to look at different household compositions. So we did 3 scenarios with single earners, 3 scenarios with dual earners, with infant, a 3-year-old, and an infant and a 3-year-old to look at different cost factors relevant to childcare. Next slide. So to give you a sense of the overall how this fell out, what you can see on the left are 1 worker scenarios, on the right are 2 worker scenarios. This is for all 12 occupations and 6 geographies. And you can see the color coding. So green is less than 10% of income towards the cost of childcare, blue is 10 to 25, yellow 25 to 40. Orange 40 to 60, red 60% of plus of income. And as Kathy said, I've been working on these issues for a lot longer than I like to claim by age, but for a long time, I was surprised at the shakeout that more than half of the scenarios, families would spend more than 25% of their income on the cost of childcare. In 40 of the scenarios, families would spend more than 60% of the cost of childcare. So when you think of that Health and Human Service 7% benchmark, you can see that in most of these scenarios, families are going to be far above it. Next slide. To give you all a sense of like what this looks like in place, threw in a slide for Hillsborough County, which is Tampa, Florida. You can see the same setup as the previous slide, but the actual occupation slotted in. And I know it's a lot to take in, but if you look at an example of hotel, motel, and desk resort clerks and go across, you can see for a 2-earner household in Tampa, Florida with a 3-year-old, it's going to be about 13% of their income. And then you can see if it's a single earner with an infant and 3-year-old, it would jump to be more than 80% of their income that would go towards the cost of childcare and everything in between. I presented this recently to an audience in Florida, and the head of a large hotel chain was there, and he came up after and said, I want you to know you really got my attention because I've heard that this is an issue, but I didn't fathom the level of issue that this might really be put on my employees, and I will take this back and think about it. And that was the goal of this analysis, is to get more diagnostic on what are the level of challenges for working families with young children. Next slide. So to put it in context of the household budget, if you're familiar with United Way ALICE, or Asset Limited Income Constrained Employed Survival Budget, we use that to look at a customer service rep as a moderate income occupation with an infant. So with 1 child, would they have enough in that occupation to cover basic household costs? You can see on the left for dual earner, the answer was yes. And on the right for single earner, no. There's a very significant gap between earnings and what they would need. That dashed line you see on the chart is the median household income, and we included that because even on the left where you could see that household might cover basic household costs, in general, a lot of families in that community might struggle to pay for childcare and other basic household costs. So putting it in the context, it just again shows potential affordability challenges. Next slide. So all of this prompted a bigger question in our mind, going back to that 7% benchmark. So if you look at discrete scenarios, like how does this play out statewide? So using that 7% of income benchmark that's recommended by Health and Human Services, we looked at all families with children younger than 5 in the state of Georgia and the state of Florida, and determined using median rate of care, how many would have to pay more than 7% of income. And you can see in Georgia, that's nearly 80%, and in Florida, that's more than 85% of families would pay more than that recommended benchmark. So it's just really underscoring the potential affordability constraints. Next slide. So in summary, what does this all mean and what did we learn? It does provide comprehensive quantitative evidence that there are substantial childcare affordability families or affordability challenges facing working families in these communities, and that the costs do consume a disproportionate share of household income, especially for single earner families and those that are employed in lower wage occupations that are essential to community functioning. You can see that childcare affordability does vary dramatically by occupation and family structure. And so this is an important consideration for there is not one silver bullet or one magic answer. This goes back to my opening remarks of this is a complex issue and there's multiple levels of consideration that could be made to address this issue. Next slide. To not leave at all on a low note, I wanted to share that in addition to banks doing individual research like what I walked through, we also have a Fed early care and education work group that was formed in 2020. We gathered to better understand what was happening during the pandemic and to talk about what we were seeing, the trends, the challenges related to supply and demand constraints. And we continue to meet regularly and work together on better understanding considerations, challenges, and opportunities. Our most recent publication focused on small business strategies to support employee childcare needs. We were able to interview small businesses and who were working in this space and learn what their strategies have been for better supporting employee childcare needs. And that ranged from providing information and referrals and them feeling like families just having their workers having knowledge and access to information on childcare options was helpful. Financial stipends and subsidies, of course, flexibility. A really interesting example was an employer who allowed parents to bring their infants to work up to the time that they were mobile and found that it actually had a really positive effect on overall culture and was family friendly and the flexibility that people needed to be able to return to work. And then on or near site childcare and some examples where some small businesses worked together to purchase slots or to provide childcare, so they didn't necessarily go it alone, but were able to meet the needs of employees that way. So there's more details in that publication if that is of interest. Next slide. And as I promised, I had links to everything that I just shared and presented, but wanted to give you all an overall sense of the kind of research that we do that's super relevant to the conversations that you all are starting here. So with that, Kathy, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you so much, Brittany. And I can tell you that Pulse is so deeply grateful for groups like the Federal Reserve for doing this kind of heavy lift in the research arena so that we can then take it back into our spaces and help people make sense of it and apply it in a way that gives us our work credibility and is validating in a lot of ways. So thank you for digging in. Thank you for all the experience you bring to it. And as somebody who's also been around for a really long time, Brittany, I'm right there with you. Sometimes it's a little embarrassing to say how long I've been doing this work, but I earned every wrinkle. So thank you so much for this. Now that we've seen that we've got a global picture of how our country is acknowledging that this is an issue that we all need to address and find solutions for. We can see that some solutions are being developed by really great organizations out there. I want to hear more from Jaren, who's going to talk to us about the impact this has on the workforce. So Jaren Kalina, would you like to join us?
Yes, thank you so much for letting me be here today. And if it's not like maybe it's a good omen or a bad omen, my son is home not having childcare today. So what a funny thing that we're having this conversation on one of those days when I'm having that issue. But my name is Jiren Kalina. I work for National Skills Coalition. I think we might have a slide on that. And specifically, I work with our the small and mid-sized businesses on workforce. I'm really excited to be a part of this conversation because we at National Skills Coalition and Business Leaders United know how important childcare is as a piece of the puzzle around workforce. I actually work remotely for National Skills Coalition and live in Berry County, so right south of Grand Rapids. And I in the past have also worked on Michigan childcare issues, being in the room around the tri-share legislation. My work's focused on elevating the voices of small and mid-sized businesses to state and federal legislators on the topic of workforce. So you might be wondering why I'm in the lineup of guests. And it's not just because I'm really passionate about this topic, but it's also because workforce policy doesn't stop at the doors of a business. And what I mean by that is our workers when we think of our workers, it has to be in a holistic manner. It's important to not forget the supports that get folks into the workforce and also that keep them in the workforce. And they're all related to attraction and retention. So simply ignoring that fact puts businesses at a disadvantage. And the reality is that years ago, employers did have a labor surplus, so maybe the idea of solving for people's barriers was not as top of mind. However, I can tell you that on a daily basis, I'm working with employers to figure out what practical solutions could be put in place to solve things like childcare issues. And a perfect example of this, I put some quotes in to this about, I think they start on the next slide. So we did a study on small and mid-sized businesses and their hiring practices. Specifically, we're talking about, do they use credentials as proxy for understanding if people have skills? And this is a good example of showing that the research doesn't just stop at talking about hiring practices around credentials. When we got to the point of asking employers what policies they might want to change to support their hiring and retention efforts, over half of them pointed to the need for removing barriers, with many of these employers pointing to the need for childcare solutions. The other questions did not push employers to this answer, and we very specifically spoke to hiring, but it was evident that you couldn't talk about hiring and retention without talking about supportive services like transportation, the cost of equipment, and childcare. So as you can see in some of these, you'll see what people are talking about as they are quoted in these, in this research that we did. And we are also in the midst of another large-scale project at National Skills, which we're calling a new promise of work. And the initiative calls for workforce development to be treated not as a second choice system, but as a first choice investment. And we're doing one-on-one calls with business and industry so that they can really envision a blue sky scenario that workforce systems actually work for the needs of employers. But often a piece of that, and very often what they're talking about, which you'll see in the next slide, is an embedded wraparound supports that they can't just be talking about. Oh, and one more slide. We can't just be talking about skills training or workforce without the need for also having funding and support for wraparound supports, more specifically childcare, because the workforce system doesn't work without including those elements. And then lastly, I was thinking about it as this conversation goes about we're coming up. I work in a policy organization, so I cannot stop with the conversation where we are coming up an election in November. And it's just important to note that when we did a public perspectives polling on what people thought of early childhood and education and workforce as a components of a workforce system, 82% of the public supported increasing funding for supportive services, especially to help people in skills training and then continue on into the retention conversation. And those things were around childcare and transportation. So as I close out my part of this, I want to remind everyone that this is not an issue that's sitting on the shelves. Most, if not every day, I'm having conversations with employers, and almost everyday barriers like solving for childcare are coming up. So in this ideal world, my hope and vision is that employers would work to understand the impact of caregiving and care access on their employees and find ways to help meet their childcare needs. And because I work for a policy organization, I would also ask that they would be advocating for the policy changes we need to fix the structural problems that are making it so hard for workers to get support and for employers to hire and retrain talent. This would recognize that this is not a problem that employers have to fix alone, but that there's people in the community that are willing to, a lot of you are on the call, are willing to support them in the process, but also need that component of funding and policy change to be able to do that.
Thank you so much, Jaren. And I think, this is beautifully segueing into this series because webinar 4 is going to be focused on that specifically. How do employers use their voice, business leaders use their voice to help inform and influence what is needed from the public sector also to address this issue? And there's a lot of opportunity there. We want to provide you with tools. We've got examples through our Michigan Childcare Champions of folks who are actually stepping up and doing that now. We'd love for the field of those folks to be wider and broader and deeper. And so your opportunity is now. So stick around for that one. I'm going to transition now to what are we doing in Michigan, right? So I'm really, really proud to introduce Cynthia Britton, who is with MiLEAP, to tell us about, as you consume all of this data, as we understand the problem as it stands right now, what are we doing about it? And the answer is a lot. So I'm going to let you hear from Cynthia right now. And Cynthia, are you there?
I am so here. Thanks for inviting me to this webinar. And Jaren, you are not alone. My 2-year-old goes to a family-based childcare provider who is lucky enough to be on vacation this week, which makes me celebrate her and also go, oh crap, what do we do? So my little 2-year-old was also home today and kind of causing chaos in the background until grandma took some grace on me and was able to watch her. So this is near and dear to my heart. It's very personal to me, as well as trying to make this connection into broader business communities. So next slide, Kathy, please. So yeah, we're from MiLEAP, and that is the Michigan Department of Lifelong Education Advancement and Potential, for anybody who did not know our acronym. Next slide, please. We are 3 years old this year in December, so we are getting into our late toddler stage and using our words and doing amazing things. But our focus really is about putting every Michigander on the pathway to prosperity by getting kids ready for kindergarten and getting everyone access to higher education and credentialing, whatever is on that pathway for them and their prosperity. We try to do this through mobilizing resources, making connections with a variety of different partners, and helping to make plans for the future on what these things can look like. So through innovation and all kinds of great work with a lot of the people who are on this call today even. Next slide, please. We just talked about a bunch of this, so I don't think I have to revisit this slide. But the only thing that I might say here is that everything that we've been talking about for the economy and businesses, childcare workers truly are the workers behind that workforce. And so, there's a huge infrastructure that is necessary for that kind of support. And everything that we're talking about for other businesses are all very true in the childcare field as well, which goes into some of the access things I'll talk about a little bit later. Next slide, please. So you've seen this 2.88 billion number now probably 3 or 4 times. Remember it. It's an important number. It's what we are losing in Michigan as a result. And this is also about $76 million in lost tax revenue, which if anybody is tracking the state budget right now is kind of massive, right? And so having that kind of revenue kind of reinvested back into our state would be incredible. All right, next slide. Thank you. So we really have 3 high priorities in the Office of Early Education within MiLEAP, and that's really about access and affordability, strengthening and stabilizing the workforce, and making sure that we are improving navigation services for families. And we have a variety of solutions that are aimed towards that, some of which are on this slide, and some of which you're going to hear in subsequent webinars as well. But we are really looking forward to program access priorities within our programs like TriShare and CareShare, right? That are accessing private dollars and partnerships with businesses to invest in a child care solution for their employees and braiding that funding with public dollars through MiLEAP, but also with private pay dollars from employees who are investing in it as well. We've made huge steps under Governor Gretchen Whitmer on pre-K for all, right? So we've put millions of dollars of investment into making sure that every 4-year-old in the state of Michigan has access to a high quality pre-K program, whether that be Head Start or GSRP, which is our Great Start Readiness Program, or the variety of other options that are available in our state funded. And I would be completely remiss if I did not mention our federally funded Child Care Scholarship Program as well, which is oftentimes a huge foundation for many of the child care programs across the state, relying on that funding to be consistent and solid funding to be able to take care of kids who are under that 200% federal poverty level. Investing in coordination is a really big undertaking inside MiLEAP. We're looking at making sure that we have as many partners on our side and allies within childcare as humanly possible. And we want that team to grow every day. And so we have invested in the regional childcare coalitions. I have seen many of the leads and co-leads on the participants list today. So hi, guys. Thank you for the work you're doing. And that is really an incredible infrastructure that innovated bringing childcare to the table along with economic development organizations, and to see what can be birthed out of that kind of collaboration. We're also investing in other options around like small business support hubs. We're utilizing federal funding that provides some flexibility to us to do some innovative kind of solutions. And so we are working with the Small Business Association of Michigan and the Michigan Economic Development Corporation to be able to integrate business and childcare support so that small businesses have access to information about what is childcare, what's the system out there, how do we get our employees access to it, and 2, so that childcare providers can actually get access to HR support or a budget, or to learn how to do employee-sponsored health insurance, right? Things like that, so that we're really doing kind of a dual-pronged solution there. And of course, those innovative practices that we're really interested in doing, right? Like we want to increase the wage of childcare providers, and we want to make sure that childcare providers are getting access to everything that makes a career important to people, which means health insurance, retirement benefits, life and disability, right? Paid time off, all of those kinds of solutions that businesses are able to provide for their employees. Many of our childcare providers do not have access to these things. And so MiLEAP is working with anybody who is available to try and find innovative solutions for those. We currently have 2 pilots going right now. One is the wage pilot, which is increasing or providing a stipend to participating childcare providers, workers, teachers of $200 to $300 a month, depending on whether they are part-time or full-time. And we're seeing really positive things out of that. It's also a private partner or private-public relationship that we are trying to nurture there, similar to what TriShare provided. And then Nurture Benefits is a MIWA, which I cannot remember the acronym for, but it is an employer welfare grouping where it brings an entire field of people together to be able to get lower costs on health insurance, 401ks, so on and so forth. And so this year was our initial year being able to launch that, and we're hoping in subsequent years that we will really see that start to pay off in dividends and make it even more accessible to our childcare providers along the way, so that we're offsetting the cost of being in the field and the wages that they are receiving, so that we can maintain the gains that we had during the COVID years, where we were able to invest a heck of a lot more money into the field and bring people into the workspace here. Next slide, please. So we are at the place where we are asking businesses and early care and education leaders to work with us on a variety of different places, and we're open to anything that anybody is kind of pitching or trying to do. Anything innovative, anything that's moving the field forward with being able to get these important services into childcare providers' hands, but also to get these services that are consistent, dependable for families to be able to access. And so, ask us about TriShare and CareShare. We are really excited about the benefits and what we've been seeing out of these programs. We want more people to like come to the table and talk with us about those. We also want folks going to your regional child care coalitions. That is a initiative that is being led by the Early Childhood Investment Corporation. And if you need a link to be able to find out who and where your regional child care coalition is, we can certainly get that information to you all. But that is really where work around making it more accessible for childcare facilities to start to grow, right? There's a lot of local municipality challenges that oftentimes pop up. Regional childcare coalitions are working on those things. And then last but not least, getting your folks or people who are employees connected to things like Pre-K for All, the Child Care Scholarship, if they are eligible, or the plethora of other opportunities that MiLEAP is able to sponsor and share. And then, of course, please always feel free contacting one of our staff over at MiLEAP, myself included. We are always looking to make good connections and to talk with people about what you're learning and the things we can do differently. Next slide, Kathy. And that's it for me today. So thanks, Kathy, for having me.
Cynthia, when I saw this slide, I thought she's going to have a very robust concluding thought for herself. This was just a placeholder for you. So thank you so much, Cynthia. I'm couldn't be more proud to be a Michigander, given all the things that we have going on. I want to thank MiLEAP for their leadership and their, I think, insightfulness on what needs to be done from an ecosystem building perspective. It's been thoughtful and strategic. And I have to tell you, I was at the Mackinac Policy Conference last week where somebody on stage actually called people Michiganians, and there was an audible gasp in the in the audience, and he was corrected very quickly. That is not what we are. We are Michiganders. So for those of you who are not Michiganders, please take that with you as a helpful reminder of who we are. I want to pivot to our next speaker who can't be here. And I'm going to tell you why. So our next speaker was going to be an incredible pair, actually. We're invited, Leslie and Laura, who run CalSec's Farmhouse, which is their early learning center. CalSec is one of our Michigan Child Care champions. And because of all the things we just talked about, they are not here because they had staffing challenges today and had to be in the classroom. We have been working with them up until about 30 seconds ago, trying to get to see if they were able to join, and it's just not going to happen. But in their absence, what we do have is an incredible video to share, which they created last year in honor of their receiving the Michigan Child Care Champion Award. I am going to share that now. It's going to require a bit of a pivot, so I've got to get out of my slide deck. So if you'll bear with me for 1 second, we'll get this started. All right. I do hope that everybody found that to be as inspiring as we did. I'm going to get my slides back up. Thanks for your patience. And all right. Good. Thank you very much. All right. So we are going to move into a panel discussion. Before we do this, I want to really kind of set more context for CalSec. CalSec is a spice company located in Kalamazoo, Michigan, for those of you who may not know where they're located. They are one of the companies in Michigan who decided that the response to the childcare needs their particular employees were having was to open an on-site childcare center. They knew that they couldn't do it alone, so they found the smartest people in early childhood that they knew. And they said, will you come and open a center for us on our campus? They have a beautiful, sprawling piece of land off of Main Street in Kalamazoo. And when those folks came on board, they had a lot of difficult conversations, how costly it was going to be, what kind of quality they wanted. It's a nature-based program that is very science-focused. They say they're building future scientists because they are a science-based company. And they also really appreciated that for the first several years, it was a separate LLC that ran their childcare. And they have an internal advisory committee that looks very closely at how the center is going, how it's running, what it needs. And they realized at some point in their journey that there was an inequity that they needed to correct. And that was to make the childcare staff CalSec employees. They did that several years ago, which meant that those folks had access to the full suite of benefits, retirement, just like if you were a CalSec employee. So these are ways. It was not cheap. It's something that they will tell you it takes a lot of work, but it was their solution, and they're so proud of it, as you could tell by that video. We're really grateful that they have allowed us to come in and see what it's like there, and that you can listen to employees say that I can go out at lunch and read to my son or go for a walk with him on the property. The people who don't have children have also shared what it means for them to have a team member that's fully present because they know that their child is so well taken care of. They also acknowledge that it doesn't meet the need of every one of their employees, but for those that it does, it is really a very unbelievable, workable solution. And it's a sliding scale. It is not free childcare for their employees. They pay based on what their income is. So if you want to learn more, we'll make sure you get connected to CalSec. They are very open to having conversations, but it's pretty inspiring. So I know we had a couple questions in the, let me get back here. I don't see anybody right now, so I apologize for that. I am going to ask a question of Brittany first before we get into the full panel discussion. And in chat, Brittany, somebody had asked the question about what were the primary business sectors in the study. Is that something you could answer?
Yes. So I actually typed it up, realized I can't respond to the full chat, but I can read aloud the occupation. So we did 3 foundational occupations: customer service reps, sale and truck drivers, labor and material movers. And then we did essential occupations, including safety we had police and firefighters, education, we used childcare workers and teachers, and then health, we used home health aides and registered nurses. And then we had 3 for hospitality: hotel desk clerks, waiters and waitresses, and building cleaners.
Thank you very much. Okay, and this is going to be open panel discussion. So if you feel you're best positioned to answer it, I'm just going to let you go ahead and unmute and respond. Again, just feel free to contribute where you can. So the first question is, what moves employers from awareness to action? What have you seen out there for those of you who want to respond?
Kathy, I'll go ahead and jump in since I was last off mute and just say that, historically, a lot of movement based on information and knowledge, right? A better understanding of both challenges and opportunities. So I think this series is really well designed for that exact information. And, it's part of the impetus for some of the research that we did. I think research like, the Chamber's analysis, giving that information, making sure employers have it, and then pairing it with what is workable in a given community or state, has what I've seen in other states help prompt action.
And
Thank you.
Kathy, just to plus one what Brittany said, we found that not being prescriptive, but being specific about ways in which employers can engage, because especially for small business owners, but you've got 100 different plates spinning. And oftentimes, they're aware of the childcare challenges their employees face. They want to do something positive and proactive, but where to start? I think even for folks who work on childcare every day, it can feel pretty unwieldy and sort of complicated, a tough nut to crack. And so what we try to focus on are case studies, best practices, and on-ramps, giving employers like sort of step-by-step, here's where you're going to want to start. You want to know what your employees need first, right? Here's the second thing. You're going to want to know who in your town, who in your city, your region are already experts in childcare. And so I think that some of the most help we can provide employers is a space to ask questions, a space to learn things, and a space to not be afraid to talk about the things they understand and don't understand. Because I've seen more than once, and I think that Pulse does an amazing job of meeting folks where they're at, but I've seen more than once where we get a handful of business leaders in a room with a handful of childcare experts. And 10 minutes in, we're talking about, enrollment versus attendance rates. And we're talking about, CCDF and PBG. And they're just like, I just want to help my employees. I don't know what any of this means. So.
Yeah, and I think, Cynthia mentioned our regional childcare coalitions. What we have found, especially in Southwest Michigan, is that is a great way for employers to get started. They're connected to cross-sector partners in that space that can help them understand. They don't have to be experts in this, to Erin's point. Like, they don't need to understand all of it. They need to know enough to act. And when they're in that space and you're all moving towards the same goal of making sure people have what they need and that the childcare sector is healthy and vibrant so that we can see those intersections, that we have employers who work across the continuum, right? We have some that are they're just interested in helping their employees, and that's fine. Let's get you set up to do that and be successful. There are others who say, I see the ecosystem problem, right? I know why we don't have the supply to meet the demand. Let me help contribute to whatever the solutions are there. And then there's those who really step into that. I want to use my voice for good, right? We want to make sure that wherever on that continuum employers live, that they have what they need to be successful. So, to move from being on the sidelines to being in the game does require proximity. So get involved where you can, understand the issues to the degree that you need to, but also listen to your employees. Don't work from assumptions. I think, Erin, you had mentioned that there was like the difference between what employers thought the issue was and what employees really were experiencing. And so let's close that gap too. Anyone else want to respond to that?
Yeah, the one thing I would say is that it's there. Well, 1+1 to Aaron saying that we speak totally different languages. Like business speaks maybe a return on investment conversation and while the childcare conversation fits in that, it's just trying to finding out how that fits in there for them. And then the other thing I'd say is when we were doing our research, and I know Britt and Eric could talk about this too, but there was a lot of conversation about employers of choice. And what I would say is that's probably a job quality conversation, but employers weren't using the words job quality. They were saying they wanted to be an employer of choice in their community. They wanted people to pick them as an employer. And often those are the easiest ones to start with. If they're not already working on the childcare issue, they're thinking of their employees as holistic humans that exist outside of work, not just employees of a company. And a lot of times you're going to see that they have a connection to the community, and they're really trying to figure out how they can reinvest in the community so that they can get all of the barriers removed for any of the individuals that live in the community to join their workforce. So not that it's like a super easy thing to find those employers, but the trusted intermediaries like Kathy talked about are like great partners in those conversations to make sure that they have a connection point to getting to the childcare providers in the community too.
Yeah, thank you. I think the other thing we have found is that we're helping employers understand that it's not just about the provision of childcare, that even if their assessment of their family leave policies have an impact, right? And not only on them being an employer of choice, but also of relieving some of the burden for infant care, right? So when we have more robust leave policies and people can be with their children longer, that allows for our infant care providers to not have so much demand on them. And so it benefits the child, it benefits the family, ultimately it benefits the employer. I listened to Dr. Mona Hanna from RX Kids last week talk about a preterm baby that was born really light, did not make it to their 4-day checkup. And when her staff finally got a hold of the mother, she said it was because she had to go back to work. So we have folks working out there who have zero time off. They're having a baby and an early baby at that, and then going immediately back to work. I know that's anecdotal. I don't have any data on that right now, but that was a story that is very fresh because I just heard it. And I think it's a lot of those sectors that can be invisible to us as well. The person working at the gas station at the corner of your street, or waiting tables at the restaurant, who really can't afford to take the time off. So if we fix this, if we start looking at solutions holistically and comprehensively, we can get to those eventually. So that, I think Brittany pointed out that hotel workers, I mean, you think about places where tourism is high, you're going to have a lot of folks in the service industry for whom they don't have consistent scheduling. So scheduling is also something that we can think of that, while not in the box of childcare, supports folks who have young children. So thinking about this through a family lens is really helpful. Yeah, okay. I'm going to ask just a couple more quick questions and then see what, like, if you've got anything, my esteemed panelists, that you've been sitting on based on this conversation and what you've heard, anything that you feel like you've left on the table that you'd like to share. And I'm going to just launch into, like, what is the opportunity right now to accelerate progress? Where do you think we really need it? Like, if we just put our foot on the gas pedal, we're going to get there. It's a thought provoker.
So, Kathy, this is Cynthia. I think from my perspective, with doing some of the pilots that we've implemented recently, they've been kind of stress tests on our system, right? But we've gotten some really great feedback about how our systems are integrating together with business, between childcare and business. And I think one of the biggest things that I think we have more opportunity to do now more than ever is asking questions, right? Like the wage pilot in particular, we asked local communities to go out and raise a certain amount of money, and that the state would then match that money 2 to 1 to provide kind of a funding mechanism for paying stipends to childcare providers. I can't tell you the amount of times I heard from businesses that heard about this pilot kind of after the fact of raising money, that were like, I just needed to be asked. I have money that we set aside every year for community building, for donations, for whatever it is, but nobody asked me if they could tap into it. So I think being curious and getting out there and getting in front of business folks, it's like the time is now. It's just really well set.
Yeah. And to your point, exposure matters, right? So we talked about proximity. We've talked about exposure. We've talked about this idea of coalition building that is not a singular sector. So I think that we're on the right path. I think we just need to put our foot down on the pedal a little bit more, and the timing is right.
Well, and speaking of asking questions, Kathy, a lot of times when I talk to chambers or business roundtables, employers, encouraging them to ask out loud questions of policymakers. of
Mhm.
folks in power. If you're a business leader, you don't necessarily have to have come up with a solution for your employees' childcare challenges start to finish, but just asking um, the the holders of the levers of power, like, what are you doing on childcare? Like, what, and so being an advocate to the degree that you're comfortable can, it can start with like, hey, what, like, I know my employees say childcare is an issue. Like, what is the state plan on doing about this? All the way up to supporting specific pieces of legislation and, testifying. But asking questions, especially during an election year, a great, first step.
Yeah, powerful reminder, Aaron. Thank you. We've only got a couple minutes left. Anything from Brittany or Jaren that you wanted to add?
Just plus oneing errands. I really can't say enough about the fact that the reality on the ground is not being heard at the legislative level. Like I'm still talking with congressional leaders and state leaders about why women can't just stay home. And so it's really tough to hear like why I feel like childcare providers make a lot of money. I hear about it all the time. So like there's a lot of childcare providers and people that are connected to childcare providers on this call. And I just want to say like the importance of talking to your local legislators and your congressional leaders is key right now because even if it's you or the business leaders, yet the business leaders obviously hold the power in some of the conversations, but you know the reality of what it's like on the ground to be with kids and being able to pay the bills and they just need to hear that more often than they are hearing it right now.
Thank you, Jaren. I remember listening to Senator McDonald Rivet when she was in Michigan saying that she really expected when she was elected for things to be like so loud, people pounding on her door, and she said it was barely a whisper. So I do think the way amplifying the voices that can't be just the childcare business owners and providers. It really needs to be all of us. And so
Mhm.
hopefully you're armed with a little more of that. And I think that if you don't know what else to say, Aaron said it beautifully. Just ask, what are you, excuse me, what are you doing about childcare? So I want to pivot slightly to let you know about what's next in our series and what to expect. If you've registered for this one, you do not need to register again. You'll just need to get it on your calendar and make sure that you join us. We're excited that the next one is going to be about practical solutions employers can take. And we're going to be joined by Sherry Penny, who is now with the Bipartisan Policy Center, who's going to tell us a lot about what she did in Iowa that was really successful and things that we can actually model here potentially. But a lot of lessons learned about what employers are doing specifically that you can take away. I want to thank you for your questions, your response to the poll that I believe was just put into chat. And so our responses to that will be shared when we do our report out. And there is going to be a post-webinar survey. That's the word I'm looking for, that we would like you to complete when you are able. And let me see here. I want to get to my slide so that you can see what we're talking about here. Okay, so the list of our next webinar is June 24th, as I just said. The third one, Aaron gave you a little bit of a hint there, is about financing solutions. So I want to do this. What am I going to do to make it happen? And so we've got, let's see here. We've got July 15th is that one. And on August 12th, our final one is building the childcare ecosystem. We talked about employers as leaders and as advocates, and we're going to hear from some employers who've done just that and provide you some tools for what it would look like for us to really amplify those voices that we were talking about. I want to give a special thanks to MiLEAP. Cynthia mentioned it, but this webinar series was made possible by a grant that was made to through MiLEAP to Pulse to actually sponsor these webinars. We're really grateful for their partnership and their support, and we look forward to seeing you soon. I want you to make sure that you are staying connected by completing the post-webinar evaluation. Watch your email for the recordings and the resources. And then make sure we see you on the next session. Small steps taken by employers can create meaningful change for families, businesses, and communities. I would really like it for all of us to keep that in mind. I'm going to keep the poll open for a couple more minutes. but we are at the conclusion of the webinar. I want to give another huge shout out to all of the team that helped put this together. It's not easy. And also to our panelists. Thank you for your time, your support, and your partnership.